to be a trend in working with adolescents was the fact that chemical dependency often skipped a generation. And what would happen would be that kids would, you'd have a set of parents that drank, and then they'd have kids. And those kids, having seen the effects of alcoholism on their parents, tended not to drink as a result, because they didn't want to end up, I'm never going to end up and be like my parents were. And then they would have kids, and those kids would all end up with drug and alcohol problems. And so a family would come to Thunder Road, and the parents would say, well, we never drank, we don't understand, because we'd ask them, well, was there addiction or alcoholism in your family? And they'd say, well, there wasn't our parents' generation, but we didn't drink as a response. But the problem was that those kids, the parents, would not have gotten any help, or they would never have gone to therapy, or they wouldn't have learned anything about the effects of alcoholism on them and on their lives. And then they'd have kids, and then all of those behaviors and characteristics that they learned from their parents would be passed down to the next generation. And then those kids would end up becoming drug addicts and alcoholics. So there would be this tendency to skip generations.
Else but alcohol. Alcohol took a main effect in all our lives. We couldn't even sit at a dinner table without my father falling down in the plate of food, or my mom trying to get up out of the chair and fallen. I mean, there was never ever a happy time in my family's like holidays or whatever. Holidays were always arguing, fighting, bickering. It just never, and the feelings that I have are probably ashamed that I let someone control me like this for so many years, and a feeling of guilt and embarrassment at times. I mean, I am so embarrassed to be around my mom at times.
So another aspect of the multi-generational behaviors that get passed down has to do with child-rearing practices, and how people tend to parent their children in the same way they were parented. So if you were brought up in a family where your behaviors were ignored, then chances are good you're going to ignore your own kid's behavior. If you were brought up in a family where people were punished through corporal punishment, then that's going to tend to also be passed down, unless there's intervention. And I believe that you can intervene anywhere in a family system. The chemical dependency literature, there are the 3 rules that tend to be pervasive in alcoholic families, which are, this is the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel rules. And what happens in families where there's addiction is, depending on, socioeconomic class and culture, there's a tendency towards secretiveness. So what happens in the home should stay in the home. If kids come home from school and one of their parents is drunk or passed out, or they're violent, there's violence as a result of addiction, there's a rule that's passed on to the kids that they're not supposed to talk about that outside of the family. Or dad was sick, or mom didn't feel good, or that didn't really happen. So kids are taught to basically not view their parents' addictive behaviors as addiction, or to lie about it or pretend it didn't happen, not talk about it to each other, to pretend that it was something other than what it was, and to not trust their own feelings about what they saw and what they felt and experienced in their own home. So then they go out into the world and they've learned to not trust their own intuition and what they feel in relationships to people, because they've been told that what they saw and what they felt wasn't real. So I think people who grew up in alcoholic homes, or homes where there's addiction, have a tendency to not really understand or distinguish reality from perception. They tend to filter things through their own experience of being told that that's not really true.
To play softball, baseball, volleyball, you name it. And every time I would look around, my parents would be there. They would come and they'd be drunk or high and just make asses out of themselves. So they stopped. I just wanted them to stop coming.
And in the egg, question, and there's huge genetic predisposition, and I think it was Bill Moyers who did that recent show on TV, basically had a lot of the current statistics, and I don't remember what it was, but it was some phenomenal amount of people who grew up in alcoholic families or have the genetic predisposition to become alcoholics. But also, there are people who grow up in alcoholic families who tend to become like the hero children. And these are the people that marry alcoholics, the rescuers, the ones that keep the whole family together. They basically help out the non-alcoholic parent to run the household. And they become overachievers. And they become people whose internal focus becomes externalized. So their focus is on keeping taking care of people and keeping everything in order. And so their basic disease, if we want to call it that, quote unquote, is their addiction to others. And then another child in the same family will end up being the person who finds the drugs and alcohol and uses that as an external kind of way to cope. So I think in both cases, their coping strategies, one is, to control and to people. The other is to trying to control one's use. So it's hard to say why some people end up kind of more in the so-called codependency realm and some people end up more in the addiction realm. Some of it might be temperament. It could be birth order.
I'm very struck by, it's almost like these tri-generational experiences or experiences that someone has in their family of origin. It's like someone took something and they molded you. And I'm not sure if talking therapies, or I'm not sure what changes it, I guess is what I'm saying. Or if people need to be in ongoing therapy for like forever, or what, I'm not sure what changes that. I'm just struck by how the depth of that and how it's like in a person's soul. Just really,
alcoholism, nobody ever brought it up, nobody talked to us in school, and if they had, I didn't hear it. I just thought that's the way things were, and continued to go into a fantasy land as I look back, and daydream. And certainly I said to myself many times that I wasn't going to be like my stepdad or my father, not being aware that my mom had the disease of alcoholism or was addicted to alcohol as well.
Start with my childhood. Let me see. I remember growing up, my mother and father not being around. I remember my grandparents really taking care of me. I remember when I was over my grandparents, the abuse, the fighting, the yelling, bottles breaking and stuff.
We need recovering kids talking to other kids. Peer models work. There was recently just a study I just heard about, the 12-step is proven that it's one of the best models that's out there. Because the model is there. You have one addict working with another addict. You don't have somebody preaching at somebody. You have somebody coming from their own experience, their own honesty, their own sincerity, their own experience, strength, and hope, and it works. So we try to incorporate that a lot here. And I think the most difficult healing that we deal with still is abuse. Abuse is rampant in addiction, emotional, physical, psychological, you name it. The abuse is just across the board. And every time I think I've heard the worst kind of abuse that I could have heard, something else walks in the door, and it breaks my heart. That's why we need more help with addiction, and I think that's why research and all the things that are out there hopefully are going to give us a venue to bring the bottoms up, to maybe get behavior, identify kids that are at risk in kindergarten, in the first and second grade. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. Mom walks in the door and you have a pretty good picture of maybe what's going on. But, I found with little kids from the work we've done in schools, all you have to do is ask them and they'll tell you. Yeah, my dad's a drunk. Yeah, my mom gets loaded. Yeah, they'll tell you. All you have to do is ask. The problem is nobody wants to ask. It's like, what do we do once we let the genie out of the bottle? Well, maybe we help the genie heal. Maybe the genie's supposed to be out of the bottle.
In front of a mirror, and I lit it up and I started coughing, and then I guess I was like trying to be like my dad. We had a bar in our house, and I remember walking over to the bar and going behind the bar, making myself a drink, and going back around and sitting on the stool. Because my father, even though he was alcoholic, man, he had some hella jokes, and he would make people laugh. So I guess I was impersonating him with the alcohol and the cigarettes.
I didn't really care at a very early age. And some of the things that brought that stuff on is my mom's an alcoholic. My father's an alcoholic. Never met my father. And my brother's an alcoholic. My sister's not. She has an addictive personality. She's overeats. She doesn't do drugs or anything. All my grandparents are alcoholic. So as far back as I can see, my whole family's alcoholic. I found out today that doesn't necessarily make me an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic and an addict is that I can't control my drinking. I never know what's going to happen once I pick up that drink or that drug. And getting back to when I was a child, I didn't want to draw any attention to myself, no matter what, because I always saw my mom, when she was drunk, always drew attention to herself, and it was always negative. And so when I was in school, I would do the best that I could, and I was a straight-A student, and I would do anything that I possibly could for the teacher not to call on me. Make sure that my answers were right, and I was quiet, and minded my own. And as I started getting older, my mom's drinking started getting worse, and I wouldn't tell her about like PTA meetings and stuff like that because of the embarrassment of her showing up drunk and embarrassing me, so I wouldn't tell her about stuff like that. And then I wouldn't tell her about, I was into sports, that was one of my escapes. And I wouldn't tell her about games and stuff like that, so she wouldn't come out there and embarrass me and be all hammered and drunk. And when I got into like 6th grade, she had already been in rehabs, and I would have to go witness that. And I would witness her fighting with the neighbors, and I would witness the ambulance people putting her in straitjackets. And the only way that I could deal with that was as I would go back in the house and I would lock it up, and I would call my sister, and my sister would say, "Okay, I'll be right over there to pick you up." And my sister also, a lot of times my mom, when she wanted to go get drunk or didn't want me around for whatever reasons, would send me to my sister's. So my sister was a caretaker, more to say than a sister. She was more of a mom.
Connection, because alcoholism and addiction are such shame-based illnesses. You grow up in a family and you're ashamed of your own family. You're embarrassed by what your parents do. You don't want to bring your friends over. You don't want to take your parent. You don't want to go in public with your parents because they get drunk and they're sloppy, or they're dealing, or they're just, it's really a shameful experience. So people come to a treatment program and they themselves have their own baggage of embarrassing, shameful, humiliating experiences. And so they tend to end up feeling like they're just basically bad people. There's something inside of me, and I am just the worst human being that was ever born. And a lot of people have this basic sense of badness. If they can understand their addiction in a historical perspective, even a multi-generational perspective, that one of the reasons you picked up drugs and alcohol is because this is what you were trained to do, then it takes away a little bit of the shame. Or as a result of the fact that you were molested as a child, that experience was so painful to you that you found drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with that emotional trauma. That gives them a little more hope that they can heal, that this is a healing process. It's not that there's just psychologically and internally such bad people that they're doomed, to be forever addicts. And so whatever their childhood issue was, and believe me, everybody has one. Everybody has something that happened to them. And most often, it's some sort of abandonment, parents coming and going, lack of stability, you would not believe, extreme cases of neglect. And we're not even talking abuse, where people are beaten or molested or whatever. We're talking neglect. Even amongst the upper classes or the middle class, where the parents just weren't there. They just weren't home. These kids were just alone all the time.
Not hitting people, although as I look back, I often wonder why, because my mom and my dad were both physically abusive to each other, and at some points toward the kids. But I think some of the discipline and some of the spankings were necessary in order to try and maintain some kind of direction and control. Although in my case, a number of times it went beyond what was reasonable and healthy. And so I grew up, and one of the things that I did as a young man was that I started daydreaming a lot.
Right before she died, I did my ninth step with her, you know, like a final. And she said, you know, that I did the best I could. And in my head was, no you didn't. But in my heart was, yeah. And when she died, everything was square. You know what? Shit. And the only reason that I did drink or use was because of the steps and support groups of people. Because I had a lot of anger, and I guess I still do. Maybe there's a lot of stuff that I obviously haven't dealt with.
Be good picture today about the generational piece. It's a part of it. And I think we need to understand the family piece and the generational piece so that we can better help the individual. And so many times when the individual comes in, they're in total denial. Anybody in your family drinker will start getting some of the language. Well, my mom liked to drink socially, not very much. I really believe that addiction, and I'm talking about all addiction, is really no different than diabetes or asthma or some public health disease issue that we see all the time. The problem is we treat it differently. If somebody doesn't take their asthma medicine and they have an asthma attack, they don't put them in Santa Rita. They go to a hospital. If somebody's a diabetic and they don't take their insulin and they go into insulin shock, they go to a hospital. They don't go to Santa Rita. Relapse is a part of the disease of addiction, and yet we treat relapse as total and complete failure.
I was in the Navy. And I look back now, and I think the only reason I joined the Navy was so I could have a little piece of him. You know, say, well, he's, you know, I'm like him a little bit. Even though I despised him and hated him. And I always said, if I ever see him, I'm going to beat his ass. And all that stuff. And so as I went through the Navy, the drinking just got ridiculous. And, but I was moving around all over the place, and I never had any roots. So it was like my childhood. You know, and I was comfortable there. Even though everybody else was getting a lot of stuff from home and, you know, letters and stuff like that, and buying stuff for people at home. I didn't do any of that. I didn't write home. I didn't buy anything for home. And because I said, you know, I'm done with them. I'm on my own now. You know, and I found comfort in the alcohol because I could live in a fantasy. You know, I didn't have to look at my life already at 22. I didn't have to look at my childhood. I didn't have to look at my family. I didn't have to look at anything about what was at hand. I could make up stuff. And that worked pretty well for me for about the next 6 years.
I think that the ability to trust has been so damaged. The individual doesn't trust themselves. So I feel like we've come a long way. I'm really excited because I'm watching research enter this arena. We just found the area in the DNA where addictive behavior is passed genetically. So it's like, what's so sad is sometimes if you can't prove it, it didn't exist. I mean, we saw all the markers, but today we know that that's true.
One of the most difficult side effects, I guess, of addiction is basically affect intolerance, is that people grow up and start using drugs and alcohol very young nowadays at 10, 11, 12. In my generation, it was more like 13, 14, 15. And so during those years when the person is supposedly, on this developmental, growth spurt of learning how to manage difficult feelings, they're learning how to manage rejection. They're learning how to manage joining peer groups, joining a group, getting kicked out of a group. They're learning how to manage sexuality. They're learning how to manage anger. They're learning how to manage separation from home and gaining independence from their families, that they start drinking and using to cope with those feelings, so they never learn how to manage any kind of feeling, really. And so then they, as adults, when they start dealing with more difficult, stresses of regular life, they can't manage their feelings around that either. And so when they get sober, they stop drinking and using. All of a sudden, these very difficult feelings arise, and they don't know how to cope. They have no strategies for how to deal with their feelings. And I think over my years of experience that the number one reason that people go back to drinking and using is because they couldn't tolerate some strong feeling. They couldn't manage their affect on some level. And it often has to do with relationships, that a person early in recovery finds themselves attracted to someone, and they can't manage those feelings. They can't manage the idea that they could get rejected. They can't manage the idea that they would have to take a risk and reach out to someone. They can't manage feelings of getting rejected for jobs. And that's how they end up going back to drinking and using, is because they can't tolerate that. So I think one of the most important parts of recovery and treatment strategies have to do with how the person's going to manage feelings in the early stages of recovery, when they're, especially in the first year.
It's really not about drinking and drugging. It's more about behaviors that I've learned over the years and I had to change. And I couldn't change them myself because I didn't know what they were, and quite frankly, it was real difficult to change. I used to think that, just say no, and everything would change, and just change it. And it became real apparent that I needed some help in doing that. And in order to do that, you've got to be willing and able to ask for help, and the humility that comes through applying these principles and working these steps allows you to be in a position of being vulnerable and being subject to change, and asking people to help you, and taking a look at your part in all the situations. Some of the things that I've come to learn is that anytime I have a involvement in kind of a problem or a solution, I've got part in both. And I need to be honest enough and open enough to look at what my part in it is.
I mean, what is it? Addiction is about? Addiction is about trying to control how I feel, control things when I cannot have control in my life. That's what it's about. One of the interesting things that people do in treating addictions is they try to control addicts. It's a fascinating thing that happens to me, and I go, well. And addicts also adopt that, and I think that's a part of the stuff that they bring to the table. They learn both in their addiction and often in the original traumas that may have brought them to the treatment to addicts. I believe that addicts can be treated with dignity and respect. I believe that even as we try to change them, one of the things we can help them hold, and they're usually some of the most demoralized people that are walking the door. And I know that demoralization often looks like it can look very cocky, it can look very like a tough guy, or whatever the words are. But those are defense constructs. I think we can all readily see through that. I believe that one of the things that we as providers can do around this whole generational, or what is it, the psychodynamic stuff that people bring to the table, is to treat people differently than they have been treated. I've learned some important things. People, you cannot help people change unless if they choose to change. It won't work. It's a very interesting thing to me. And so now what I do, especially working with addiction or addictive disorders, is I really have taken on the idea of trying to understand what it is that the person wants to do versus what it is they appear to have come to see me about. I spend probably the first 3 to 5 sessions working on what is it they actually want to do. I really want to understand that and help them articulate that and explore that to make sure that the words that they're saying are actually a reflection of what's in their heart. What is that deceived them? What brought them here? And then once we've established what it is that we're trying to do, I then do this other really radical thing. I ask people, so how do you think we might go about accomplishing that? What thoughts? What did you envision? What had been your idea? What had you hoped would happen when you came?
So I think a lot has happened in the 20 years that I've been doing this, and I've been so blessed to be able to be a part of that process. We have a long way to go, a very long way to go, but at least we're getting all the disciplines to the table. We're getting mental health and shelter and alcohol and drug and children's advocates. We're looking more at a multidisciplinary approach to addiction instead of everybody working in their own little, the collaboration, the network.
Coping strategies is another really big one. That if you see, let's say for example, the classic 50s household, you see your parents come home every day from work and they sit down and they have a martini and then they have maybe a snack and then they have 3 more drinks and the kids are waiting around for dinner to be served, but it never gets served because the parents are too busy drinking because they're unwinding from their busy day. Then kids are taught that alcohol is a good coping strategy for taking care, coming home and relaxing from, the stress of the day. Or that alcohol is a good coping strategy for socializing. That if you have a couple drinks before your friends come over, then you're going to have a much more lively conversation and people are going to be more relaxed. So learning that smoking pot even is a coping strategy for dealing with certain situations in life is something that gets passed down generationally. So another aspect of the multi-generational behaviors that get passed down has to do with child-rearing practices and how people tend to parent their children in the same way they.
Again, that generational piece is so important. It's the clock is ticking, and some people are never going to get it. But I think the more we in the treatment field look at our own recoveries, look at our own experiences, and keep pushing our own envelope to try to find more innovative ways to make these connections, to help people, to help families heal.
To be honest and to open with those people and let them know that there is a way out and there's some other type of dynamic going on. And if it wasn't for the 12-step program and people having to be honest and to be open with me, I don't know that I would be here today sharing with you.
Well, I can just tell you what my hope is. And my hope is that when someone comes to a 45-day treatment program, Horizon has many programs, and the one that's here, Cronin House, is a 45-day program. My hope is that when that person leaves, they will have some understanding that their drug and alcohol use was related to something about their life growing up.
I started coming into feelings or whatever. I would listen to music. That was my escape. Because I could listen there and I didn't have to be in the room. I didn't have to be in the house. I didn't have to have my mom drunk. And I could just go in my own little world and seclude myself and isolate. And that type of behavior from probably 7 or 8 is still with me today. If there's a problem, I will get into the music and I will go away. In a sense, not necessarily leave my body, but that's what I do. And then once I found alcohol to do the trick, and I remember making a decision when I was young saying, I'll drink anything but vodka. I will not drink vodka, because that's what she drank. And she had boyfriends in and out. I never really had a father figure. My brother was always drunk. He would come over every once in a while. And he would do things like, he would say, okay, well, I'm going to come pick you up. We're going to have a company party. And he'd show up like 6 hours late. And I'd be all disappointed. And he'd end up taking me to the bar, and I'd play pool at the bar. And he'd buy me peanuts or little stuff like that to pacify me. And I held on to that my whole life, and I still have a resentment, I guess, against him. And I take that also towards really any authority male figure, that I don't trust them, I don't believe them, and they're going to hurt me, so therefore you can't come in.
To make these connections, to help people, to help families heal.
I see a lot of my mom in me. And some of it's good, some of it's not so good, but I can see it and try to do something about it. That I'm the last link in my immediate family for the alcoholism. My brother's clean, my sister's doing what she's doing. I'm clean today. So as it stands right now today, on my side of the family, there's no more rampant alcoholism. Everybody's in recovery, trying to do something about it.
So learning how to interact and get back into family system, that's where we see a lot of relapse.
The whole idea of a higher power, I think for somebody who's new in recovery, I'll just start with the newcomer versus somebody who's been in recovery for a long period of time. The whole concept of the 12 steps and having a higher power, it has a lot to do with letting go of control, and also feeling like one is a part of something greater than themselves. Alcoholics and addicts tend to be incredibly isolated and alone and left out of a lot of kind of the mainstream of community. And they tend to believe, because of the nature of the illness, that they can control their using. And if they do it their own way, if they use willpower, if they just try hard enough, that they'll be able to be a normal drinker or a normal user. I think most people who come to treatment would like, on some level, to go back to drinking like everybody else does. Have 2 drinks, smoke a little pot, do a couple lines, have some fun, and then go about their lives. And this, of course, is depending on where they're at in their disease. If they're in late stage addiction, the picture's going to look real different, because they're going to be a pretty deteriorated person, both spiritually, psychologically, and physically. But most people tend to come to treatment in kind of the middle stage of use. And that's the first time they come to treatment. That's the first opportunity they usually have to try to get clean and sober. And so the whole concept of not being in control, not being able to control one's use, understanding that one's life is unmanageable as a result of their using, and then understanding that if they let go, if they stop trying to control, that they may gain actually some sense of control over their lives, if they let go of the fact that they believe they can control their use. So it's kind of a paradoxical concept, and it's hard for people in the beginning to understand it. In adult treatment, we tend to try to teach people some kind of basic understanding of impulse control. So when someone has an impulse or has a feeling, then they come up with an action plan. So we try to teach them how to have a space between their impulse or their feeling or their desire and the action that they're going to take to achieve that. And in creating a space, they can then make a choice. So if their first impulse is, well, gee, I'm really feeling lonely right now, and if I just could smoke some pot, I would really feel better. I could go find my old, using friends. I know that they'd have some, and that would really, help me to alleviate my loneliness. If we can teach them other options. So you're having the feeling, you feel lonely, you have the desire to smoke some pot, to call one of your using friends. What else can you do? What are some other options besides picking up the phone immediately and calling someone? Which is often what happens, is that people, experience a desire and then they reach out for what is the known thing that's going to alleviate whatever that stress is, or that pain, or that feeling. And they don't take a moment to pause and think about what some of the options are. And so during like a residential treatment program, actually in outpatient too, we try to teach people to do other things. And some of the classic things that we try to teach people to do is to reach out to the 12-step programs and go to a meeting, basically call someone on their phone list, a sponsor, a friend in AA, or a friend in another 12-step program, someone else in their support group, but to basically have alternatives to what they're used to, which is using.
Hope that we're just beginning to get that it's a disease. It's not that people are bad. It's not that they, I think that Just Say No did more damage to addicts trying to get well, because they were asking themselves, why can't I just say no? The public was saying, just say no. And the individual couldn't do it because that's not the way this disease works. And my dad died. Every male member of my family died from their addiction, whether it was drugs or alcohol or a combination of both, and they led tormented lives.
Sometimes it's either do or die with some of this stuff. You want to take a look at it, but you don't. Sometimes you got to be forced to, and maybe that's what the reason for this is. But it doesn't really matter. It's that when she died, I knew she was going to be more peaceful. And it was good for her, because she was going through a lot of pain. But as far as our relationship, it was tough because I was put in the role of caretaking, and I had no skills at that. As I started at 12 drinking after that one time, then I started smoking pot on a daily basis, and it was weird how it happened, because it was just that one time, and then from then till I joined the military, which was 17, I smoked pot every chance I possibly could. I would always buy my own if I could, and it would have to be the best, because that way if I shared it with somebody else, they could say he had the best. And I did the same with alcohol. It would always be, if somebody bought beer, I had Jack Daniels. If somebody had like homegrown weed, I would have the Purple Sensimilla. I always had to be better than.
One of the things that I think is important when we're working with people with addictions, or who are trying to change something in their lives, so I don't care what it is to really find a way to help people know that they're like new. They're brand new, and they get to do whatever it is they think they want to do, and to not have a boxed idea about where people can go in terms of recovery. What does that mean? To try and stay out of boxes, I guess. So that's one thing. And one of the struggles of that in working with people is the boxed ideas that people have for their own selves, for themselves when they come to treatment. One of the early stage interventions is with those boxes. So if I can get someone to see beyond their boxes, the boxed idea that they have for themselves, one of the dangers of that is usually what happens is, within a boxed idea, there's a certain sense of safety. And when you get people to step outside of it, they're kind of like, okay, kind of like that. And from one place to another, people have to, I guess if you work for the clinician from one place to another, one of the tricks to that is knowing that when people step out, that there's going to be dissonance, there's going to be fear, there's going to be anxiety, and one of the natural compulsions is to step back because I know how to do this, and to be able to give people a context for where they are so that they might stay there long enough in order to make the next step and go forward.
I had to live with my mom, and the harder part about it is I had a little brother who I had to take care of, but my mom was always drunk. She was never home for us, and when she was home, the alcohol, she would bring different guys over the house all the time. And a lot of times when she would come home, I don't know, I guess after having sex or whatever, she would try to run to the bathroom and she would end up throwing up all over the place. And then she'd come in my room and wake me and my brother up and make us clean it. You know, and it was just really weird and awkward for me. But alcohol took a lot of time for my mom because she couldn't do anything without drinking.
It's the incredible power of messages. How messages are not thoughts or ideas, but they're more importantly, it's almost like it's in your skin. And it can dictate, it's the lens through which you see everything in the world. It's the way in which you understand how things are supposed to work, how people develop and articulate their values in the world, are seen through the lens of some crap they possibly got somewhere along the way, is really fascinating and also very scary and hard to intervene with. So I know that one of the great ideas of treatment is that we will interrupt, that at some point in the process they'll come see you or come see me and we will interrupt these messages, these tri-generational beliefs and values that people have, and therefore be causal in bringing about a change in the person that will be passed on to others.
There's 3 young men that walked in the door for the group. Guess what? Their parents were clients. So it's like, hello, and guess what? Their parents were not in recovery anymore. And their parents came in loaded, and the kids got loaded with their parents. Most of the young people we accessed started using at home, started using with their parents. Parents thought it was neat, or the parents were so loaded or so drunk, it was like, oh yeah, just be quiet, just do this and stay out of my hair. So I think we need more research in this field, in this area. We certainly have enough subjects to draw from in our community. But in my family, what my joy is, it stopped. I got in recovery. I said, this is not going to continue, this behavior, this addiction. I'm going to educate. I have 4 daughters. All 4 of them are clean and sober, thank you, God. I have 2 beautiful grandchildren, and my grandson makes me cry. He's, he's 9 years old, and they came to his classroom to talk about addiction, and he said, I'm allergic to drugs and alcohol. I can't ever do that. And it's like, it worked. It really, really works. The teacher called and said, your grandson's amazing. What he knows about drugs and alcohol is absolutely amazing. And it's like he has this knowledge. We didn't scare him. I didn't scare my kids. I just told them the truth. And I just said, I just don't want what I saw when I was growing up. I don't want that anywhere near my kids or my grandchildren. That's the gift we give the world. And I just think that this disease does so much damage. It just destroys so much in people's lives. I have such a tremendous amount of, I don't even have the language for it. The people that walk in these doors, the courage it takes for them to recover, to heal, to walk through the process.
Yeah, when I was using, I seen the patterns, and I kept using, and I kept doing the patterns, and now that I'm clean and sober and I look back, it's incredible how they are a part of your life and how they can affect your life. And I didn't know that because I just thought it was an everyday thing, because that's what I was around, that's what I was used to, that's all I really ever knew was addictive behavior, alcoholism, circle of violence. I thought it was normal. I just really, truly thought it was normal. Until now that I look back and going to school and taking these classes and stuff, it's not normal. It's just a pattern that was set in me. And I'm not asking for the Leave It to Beaver, the Cleaver family or nothing like that. But I just wish it could have been some type of balance, that maybe a little balance in our family. but the pattern is there, and it just continues and continues and continues. And I know in me today it's still continuing, but at least I can catch it now. I know it's not normal. I know it's not an everyday thing. I can try to change it because I have choices. Either stay in the crap or get out of it.
Is sometimes when I'm working with people, and I learned this somewhere else, I used to think of trauma as being what the word seems to imply, a building fell on you. And it's not always like that. It's these subtle things happening to small beings. Just, man. So sometimes what I do in working with people, addicts and alcoholics, I work with a lot of people in the penal systems, etc., is I remember that they were children.
Or there's times where I will run with that also. You know, and then I'll buy into it and I'll believe that until somebody else says, hey, well, what are you doing? You know, they'll see it before I do. And that's the purpose of, for me, is to have a support group, a sponsor, and close friends that are true friends, that are willing to say, look, man, you know, I love you to death, and I love you. This is why I'm going to tell you this. You know, it's not being mean or anything else. It's that I'd rather have you mad right now and save your life than kill you and not be mad at you. And that's the kind of stuff that I need, personally, because I never had that in my life.
Today, people can walk in the door and we can explain to them that addiction is a brain disease, has a neurological part, has a social part, has a spirit, we're dealing with the whole person instead of just don't drink. I think the sadness that I see is the inability of treatment facilities still to deal with the whole family. It's like you can't, when I first came in recovery, the idea was, well, here's this alcoholic just ravaging people's lives. We'll fix him, we'll get him sober, and then everybody else will be fine. Well, today we know that's not true. So what we're working real hard at doing now is that next level, where we're trying to assist parents with parenting classes, anger management, all the stuff. It's like, it's really hard just to get clean and sober, but there are other things out there that we need to be paying attention to as treatment providers that for a long time just got swept under the carpet. You know, so we're getting, I think, much more honest and more open and about providing services for the whole family.
She liked to move a lot. And between probably kindergarten and sixth grade, I lived in 4 different places, all around the same school. And she always had different jobs, and she would, you know, say, well, call in work for me because I'm sick. And I would do that, and I didn't really know what was happening. You know, I didn't know if she was really drinking drunk until I got a little bit older, you know, 11, 12, something like that. And then I started going over friends' houses, and I noticed that their family wasn't like that, like at my house. And so I wouldn't invite people over anymore. That just negated, do not go to my house no matter what. And so I spent a lot of time away as much as I could at other people's homes, because that was like a family environment, you know, and that's something that I didn't know it, but that's what I wanted. And that's what I was searching for.
I mean, from day to day, from moment to moment, not knowing whether or not he was going to be drunk or he was going to be your friend. He was the perfect Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In the morning, he'd wake up every day at 6 o'clock, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, just loving us, and hey, and seemed like he'd give you the shirt off his back, and everything was just wonderful. And when he came home from work, he was a different man. And as I look back, in almost every case, he was drinking when he was at home, and he wasn't. And so eventually what we ended up doing, me and some of my brothers and sisters, we would stay away from the house until he passed out, which I know now. I didn't know it at the time. I thought he was just going to bed. And then it was safe to go in the house. And we had to be quiet, because if we woke him up, he'd come out like a raging maniac. My mom, on the other hand, instead of being out and about, toward the later years of my high school, was a recluse and stayed in her room. And often I was asked to go up to the corner liquor store and bring her back a gallon of wine.
Still felt like when he died I was like 12 years old. After that happened, I really started drinking and using a lot because I wanted the pain to get away. And once I was high and drinking, I was in like this little bubble and nobody could ever burst it because I was in my own world. And nothing anybody could say or do would hurt me anymore. And then a year later, I got a phone call that my little brother died. They found him in the bottom of a river in Sacramento. He died of drugs and alcohol. So when that happened, that I escalated on the cocaine and escalated on the alcohol. I really didn't care about life. I really didn't care about anything, really.
In talking with you about working with people with addictive disorders, I guess the thing that's most striking to me about that is what happens after people sober up. I'm pretty fascinated with both the messages that people got from their family of origins, the messages that they took from their addictive process, and the messages that are kept alive by their own guilt and their shame and kind of what they do with it. And how that instructs, empowers, or disempowers them in what they go for in the world. What do they try to do? And then the whole scope idea of recovery, and let me qualify. I'm not in charge, I don't know. It's not for me to say what's right or wrong about recovery. I'm just looking at how people seem to do it. So a lot of people that I work with in my practice are in early stages or middle stage recovery. They're not always people who are using, but people who are trying to kind of self-actualize, if you will. Try to find a life and try to have something beyond what happens in a 12-step community or what happens in an AA meeting or like that.
And although in some aspects I think drinking and using is some soft attempts at suicide, but that certainly wasn't the reason that I drank and used. It seemed to work for me. And so I don't know why I called him, and he asked how I was doing, and I told him I was fine. Which is the insanity of the whole thing. Here I am, I can't feed myself, I don't have a job, nowhere to go, nowhere to turn, nobody in my life. And, but, it seems that part of the behavior, part of the thinking is we don't think anybody knows, and so it was another one of those lies that I did pretty much on a regular basis because I wasn't even aware that I was lying. I justified it. That that they didn't care and they didn't understand, and why go into all that anyway? And so it became a way of life for me. When I was to come to find alcohol did for me what I could not do for myself. And as I look back, what it did was that it reduced. At the beginning, it reduced the fear in my life. It seemed to allow me to be okay doing what I was doing, being with who I was being with, and okay where we were at. Communicate, I'd never learned to talk, share, any of that stuff. That's a power greater than themselves, And, okay, that made sense. And I said, well, what about this God thing? And I remember pretty clear what he said when I asked him that. He says, I don't know. He says, I'll tell you what my sponsor told me. And I'll just say it to you. He said that my sponsor told me that there was only two things I needed to know about God. That there was one, and that he wasn't it.
But I never want to go back to that life that I had before. It's just so painful, and I know at times right now I still feel the pain, but through recovery and through my sponsor, I'm processing it. Before I would never write things down. Now I have to journal because when I'm full of anger, anybody can trigger me at any moment. I need to write things down. I need to journal. I need to pray. There's times at work when work isn't going right. I got to go in the bathroom and get down on my knees. I'm not preaching or anything. I'm just saying that recovery works. It truly does. The only difficulty I'm having is family. And You're absolutely right. There's being clean and sober, I look back, the pattern is amazing, and the circle of violence is amazing, and I act like my mother acts at times, and I hate it, but I catch myself. And when I catch myself, I just thank God that I catch myself, because maybe this is hateful, but I don't want to be like her. And till this day, the way I treat my kids is that I never, ever would treat them the way my mom treats me. There's not a day goes by that I don't tell them I love them, I am there for them. You know, I don't put demands on them, I don't try to control them. But that's one thing that I am grateful for today, is I will not do that pattern with my kids.
Is sad is everybody expects the addict or the alcoholic to succeed the very first time they try. And relapse, again, is a part of the disease. I don't expect that. When we have our expectations way up here, we're going to end up with a lot of resentments. So I think we also need to educate the public. And a lot of the people that have come through here have gone back to school, and they're just doing such fantastic work. That's the joy. And then they can come and teach the people coming up behind them. And that's developing a new family system, a new kind of generational connectedness. They may not be your blood family, but they're your recovery family. And I think for those of us that may have been the first person in our family to get in recovery, they give us permission to continue to walk a recovery process, because we certainly haven't gotten that from the family. In fact, if anything, most families try to sabotage recovery for people. And my family certainly didn't think I needed recovery because I didn't drink. And they were just really mad because when I got recovery, I wouldn't bail them out of jail anymore. So they really had a lot of investment in trying to stop me from doing what I was doing. And then when Adult Children of Alcoholics started, that's when I took off. That was the venue that worked for me, and the models that were available before that didn't work. So of course I was told I was the problem, and I just needed to get my stuff together and work harder at making these models work for me, when in fact they really weren't appropriate for the needs that I had. So it was nice we all went out and created one, and it's working for a lot of people, and it still works for me.